How DNA solved a 30-year cold case. The lab was silent except for the faint hum of machines. A group of investigators leaned forward, eyes glued to a computer screen. After decades of searching, something extraordinary had just happened. The results came back. There it was, the match. DNA, the one piece of evidence that had haunted them for 30 years, had finally spoken. It wasn't just any lead, it was the lead. The data pointed to a man named Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, a face no one had expected. Back in the mid-1970s, California looked like a dream. Suburbs were booming, families were moving into new homes, and children rode bicycles through quiet neighborhoods. The attacks started small. Windows left open for cool air were found pried apart. Families who went to bed peacefully woke to find their homes had been entered while they slept. But then the crimes grew darker. Women were attacked in their own homes. Husbands were forced to watch, helpless. He slipped into neighborhoods like a ghost, striking in the dead of night. He cut phone lines before entering homes and sometimes ate food from refrigerators as if he owned the place. For years, he struck again and again. Entire families were shattered in the middle of the night. He was always one step ahead, always gone before help could arrive. By the early 1980s, murders began. Investigators realized this wasn't just a thief or a rapist. This was a predator who escalated his violence until it was unstoppable. And then suddenly it ended. The attacks stopped. California breathed again, but the fear never really left. Detectives carried the files with them into retirement. Families prayed for closure. Newspapers ran anniversary stories. Will the Golden State Killer ever be found? The years passed. Technology changed. Evidence that once seemed useless, tiny drops of blood, small traces of saliva, suddenly became valuable with DNA testing. Then came a breakthrough: genetic genealogy. Investigators uploaded the killer's DNA to public databases, searching for relatives. A family tree began to grow. At first, it was distant cousins. But then the lines pointed closer and closer, each branch narrowing to one man, Joseph James DeAngelo. Detectives followed him quietly. At a grocery store, he tossed trash into a bin without a thought. Investigators moved in and collected it. Back at the lab, the test ran again. When the result flashed on the screen, no one could deny it. It was a perfect match. As the sun rose over his quiet suburban home, officers prepared for the takedown. His neighbors had no idea the past was finally crashing down. The officers surrounded the home with precision. When the command came, the door was breached. Voices shouted, "Police! Hands up!" DeAngelo froze. His eyes widened, but he didn't resist. Perhaps deep down, he knew the game was over. The Golden State Killer was finally in custody. News spread like wildfire. By afternoon, television anchors delivered the headline with shock and relief. Joseph James DeAngelo, 72, arrested as suspected Golden State Killer. Neighbors couldn't believe it. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others felt anger, realizing he had lived quietly among them all this time. At the station, detectives confronted DeAngelo. He sat in silence, face expressionless. The DNA didn't lie. The legal process began swiftly. Survivors and families filled the courtroom, many older now, waiting for a moment they thought might never come. When DeAngelo entered in an orange jumpsuit, the room went still. He looked frail, far from the terrifying figure who once prowled the night. Prosecutors laid out crime after crime, connecting them with forensic evidence. DNA linked attacks hundreds of miles apart. Strangely, some young women showed up smiling, writing notes, as if the man on trial were a celebrity. The contrast was chilling. Finally, the verdict was delivered. Joseph James DeAngelo pled guilty to 13 murders and admitted to numerous assaults and burglaries. As part of a plea deal, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had come at last. The courtroom erupted in emotion. Some cried. Some hugged. Others sat in silence, the weight of closure finally settling in. At San Quentin Prison, DeAngelo lived out his years behind bars. Older now, thinner, his dark eyes still burned behind the cell bars. But death didn't come in the gas chamber. It came quietly. In 2013, he died of illness in a prison hospital. The case left a legacy. DNA, the silent witness, would never forget. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, echoing through the courtroom. Joseph James DeAngelo, the man once called the Golden State Killer, sat motionless. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Survivors and family members wept openly, some clutching photos of loved ones who never lived to see this day. The world now knew his name, his crimes, and his face. But for all the relief, the air was heavy. Justice had arrived, but it had taken over 30 years. Yet the story didn't end in that courtroom. What happened after would change the way investigators around the world solved crimes forever. Reporters filled the courthouse steps, cameras flashing. Microphones shoved into the air as attorneys and survivors gave their statements. One woman, her voice trembling but strong, said into the cameras, "We waited decades for this moment. DNA gave us justice. Without it, he would still be free." Those words traveled far beyond California. They reached detectives across the country who sat with their own boxes of cold files, wondering if DNA could also be the key to their unsolved mysteries. Inside San Quentin Prison, DeAngelo lived his days quietly, locked in a cell like so many others. But outside those prison walls, something had shifted. The Golden State Killer case had opened a door that could never be closed. Detectives from small towns to major cities began pulling dusty evidence boxes from storage rooms. Some of those boxes had been untouched for decades. Inside them were blood samples, old cigarette butts, bits of hair. For years, these scraps had meant little. But now, they could be the starting point for something bigger. The method used to catch DeAngelo, genetic genealogy, was groundbreaking. Instead of waiting for a criminal's DNA to show up in a police database, investigators uploaded samples to public genealogy websites, the same places everyday people use to learn about their ancestry. If even a distant relative had uploaded their DNA, investigators could build a family tree and trace it back to the suspect. It was a brand new kind of detective work, one that mixed science, history, and relentless patience.
And it worked.
Soon, stories began to emerge. In Washington state, a decades-old double homicide was solved using the same method. In Indiana, the murder of a young girl was finally linked to her killer through genealogy. Across the country, families who had been waiting for answers suddenly received phone calls from detectives with news they thought would never come. But there was another side, too. The use of genealogy raised questions. People wondered, should investigators be allowed to search these databases without permission? What about privacy? If someone uploaded their DNA to find a cousin, should it also be used to catch a criminal in their family tree? The debate raged in newspapers and television programs. Privacy experts warned about the risks, but victims' families argued that justice mattered more. If it can stop another family from going through what we did, one mother said, then it's worth it. Meanwhile, survivors of DeAngelo's crimes faced their own struggles. Some felt relief, finally able to sleep without fear of him returning. Others still carried scars that justice could not erase. One survivor, who had been a teenager when attacked, told reporters, "It's never really over. The fear lives in you. But at least now, he can't hurt anyone else." Back in prison, DeAngelo became a symbol. He rarely spoke, often sitting in silence, avoiding eye contact with other inmates. Guards said he was quiet, withdrawn, but always aware. He never admitted guilt in his own words. His silence made him even more chilling, as though he carried his secrets with him into the cell. Journalists continued to dig into his past. They uncovered details about his time as a police officer, his family life, and his years hiding in plain sight. Neighbors recalled him as odd, someone who yelled at children or muttered angrily to himself. Few suspected the man next door was the same predator who had terrorized California for years. For the families, the trial had closed one chapter, but many still felt something missing.
Some wanted to know why.
Why had he chosen his victims? Why had he stopped? But DeAngelo never gave those answers. The silence left holes that no verdict could fill. What mattered most was the lesson his case left behind, that DNA was the ultimate witness. Unlike people, DNA never forgot. It didn't fade with time. It didn't get scared. It waited, sometimes for decades, until science was ready to uncover the truth. This truth brought hope. Detectives across America began working new cases with old evidence. Families who had waited 30, even 40 years for answers began to hope again. If the Golden State Killer could be caught, then maybe their cases could be solved too. But with every answer came more questions. If DeAngelo could live undetected for so long, how many others were out there? How many killers had blended into neighborhoods, living ordinary lives while carrying unimaginable secrets? In California, a candlelight vigil was held for the victims. Families gathered with photos and candles, some hugging, others standing in silence. The names of those lost were read aloud, one by one. As the candles flickered, the message was clear. Justice had come, but it came late. The pain of lost lives would never fully fade. The Golden State Killer's story had changed the world of law enforcement, but it also left a shadow. Because in the silence of the night, as candles burned low, people remembered the fear he had spread. The thought that one man could haunt so many lives for so long was something no one could forget. And though Joseph James DeAngelo would die behind prison walls, the questions he left behind, about evil, about justice, about the power of DNA, would echo long after him.